Thomas had always known he was adopted. Since he was little, his adoptive mother, Ines, had told him the truth. But at 20 years old, that truth seemed like a distant and fuzzy story until one afternoon everything changed. It was a cloudy afternoon when Thomas came home after his university classes. Ines was waiting for him in the living room with a worried expression he had never seen before. Sitting on the couch with an envelope in her hands, she invited him to sit beside her. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost tangible. "Thomas, there is something I need to tell you," Ines began, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas leaned forward, his heart starting to beat faster. "You always knew you were adopted, but there are details I never told you because I didn't know them all until recently." Ines took a deep breath before continuing. "Your biological mother abandoned you, but she didn't do it because she didn't love you. The circumstances were complicated." Ines' hands trembled as she spoke, and Thomas felt a pang of pain seeing the suffering in the eyes of the woman who had raised him. Thomas remained silent, processing Ines' words. He knew she had always been honest with him, but this revelation was an unexpected blow. "Why are you telling me this now, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ines looked at the envelope in her hands and opened it, taking out a photograph and a letter. "A few days ago, I found this among my old things. I don't know how it got there, but it's from your biological mother." She handed the photograph and the letter to Thomas. In the photo, a young woman with the same intense brown eyes that Thomas saw in the mirror every day smiled at the camera. The letter, written in careful handwriting, was brief but heartbreaking. "Dear son, if you ever get to read this, I want you to know that I love you. I abandoned you not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. I hope you can forgive me one day and understand what happened. With eternal love, Marta." Thomas felt a lump in his throat as he read the letter. The mix of emotions, sadness, confusion, and a glimmer of hope overwhelmed him. "Marta," he whispered, testing the name on his lips, trying to connect that name with his own identity. Ines looked at him with tenderness and concern. "Thomas, I want to help you discover more about her, about your past. I don't know the whole story, but I think you deserve to know it." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind spinning with questions and mixed emotions. Over the years, he had learned to love and respect Ines as his true mother, but now, Marta's shadow loomed, mysterious and painful. The need to know his true origins and understand his biological mother's sacrifice began to grow within him. "Let's find out the truth, Mom," he finally said, looking at Ines with determination. "No matter what we find, I want to know who Marta was and why she had to leave me." Ines smiled, a mix of sadness and relief on her face. She knew this journey would not be easy, but she was willing to accompany Thomas every step of the way. Together, they would begin to uncover the secrets of the past, hoping that the truth, no matter how painful, would lead to a deeper understanding and a stronger connection. The day of the interview had arrived, and Thomas felt a knot in his stomach. Not only because it was an important opportunity for his career, but also because he carried with him an object filled with history and meaning, his adoptive mother. Ines's antique watch. While adjusting his tie in front of the mirror, he couldn't help but think of the recent revelations about his biological mother, Marta. Although he tried to focus on the interview, those thoughts followed him like a shadow. Upon arriving at Mr. Perez's office, Thomas took a deep breath and entered. The office was elegant and sober, with shelves filled with books and a large window that let in sunlight. Mr. Perez, a man in his 50s, stood up to shake his hand. He had an intense, yet kind look. "Thomas, right? Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat," said Mr. Perez, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. Thomas sat down, trying to calm his nerves. As they talked about his studies and experience, Thomas noticed Mr. Perez's gaze frequently lingering on his wrist, specifically on the watch. At one point, Mr. Perez frowned slightly and leaned forward. "That watch?" he began, with a tone of surprise in his voice. "May I see it up close?" Thomas, a bit confused, took off the watch and handed it to him. Mr. Perez examined it carefully, and his expression changed from curiosity to shock. "This watch belonged to my daughter, Marta. She disappeared many years ago. I never thought I'd see it again." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "Marta? Your daughter?" he asked, his voice trembling. Mr. Perez nodded, still looking at the watch with misty eyes. "Yes, my daughter. She disappeared when she was very young. We've been looking for her ever since, but without success. This watch was a birthday gift I gave her. It's unmistakable." Thomas was speechless. "My adoptive mother, Ines, gave it to me. She said it belonged to my biological mother, Marta," he explained, trying to process the impossible coincidence. Mr. Perez stared at him, processing the information. "Thomas, this is incredible. If your biological mother is Marta, that means you are my grandson." The revelation dropped like a bomb, leaving both men in a silence filled with awe and emotion. After a moment, Mr. Perez stood up and walked to the window, looking at the horizon. "I always hoped to find her, to know what happened to her. And now, this watch is the connection I never thought I'd find." Thomas felt overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: disbelief, hope, and deep sadness for the woman he was just beginning to know through scattered fragments of information. "Mr. Perez, I also want to find her, to know what happened. If she is really Marta, my biological mother, we need to discover the truth." Mr. Perez turned to Thomas, his eyes full of determination and a spark of renewed hope. "You're right, Thomas. We must find her, not only for her, but for us, for our family. This is just the beginning." With a new sense of purpose, Thomas and Mr. Perez joined forces, determined to unravel Marta's mystery. The watch, a simple piece of old machinery, had become the link that would unite them in a desperate quest for the truth, for family, and for closure of a chapter filled with pain and loss. Thomas was stunned by Mr. Perez's revelation, but it also gave him a new purpose. When he got home that night, Ines was waiting for him in the living room, as always, but this time, Thomas noticed a tension in her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," Thomas said urgently. Ines nodded and invited him to sit beside her. "I went to a job interview today," Thomas began, "and the interviewer, Mr. Perez, recognized the watch you gave me. He said it belonged to his daughter, Marta. Mom, I need to know the truth. What really happened to my biological mother?" Ines sighed deeply, her face reflecting the weight of years of secrets and pain. "Thomas, I never wanted to hide the truth from you, but it's a complicated and painful story. I think it's time you knew everything." Thomas felt his heart pound as Ines began to speak. "More than 20 years ago, I worked as a social worker in a program to help young people in difficult situations. That's where I met Marta. She was a bright and kind young woman, but she was trapped in a terrible situation. She had a boyfriend, Raphael, who was violent and manipulative. Marta wanted to escape him, but she was afraid. One day, Marta disappeared. No one knew where she was, and the police didn't seem to have enough clues to find her. I was desperate to help her, so I started investigating on my own. I found some clues that led me to a park on the outskirts of the city. That's where I found you, Thomas, abandoned on a blanket, barely a baby." Thomas listened in silence, feeling how each word from Ines filled the gaps in his past. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I was afraid that knowing it would hurt you. And honestly, I didn't have all the answers." I only knew that Marta was in danger and that I had to protect you. I decided to raise you as my own son, hoping that one day I could find Marta and give you both the answers you needed." Thomas felt a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Mom, thank you for everything you've done for me. But now, I need to find her. I need to know what happened and why she left me." Ines nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand, Thomas, and I'll support you in any way I can. Together, we'll find the truth." That night, Thomas and Ines sat together for hours, going over every detail Ines remembered about Marta, every little clue that could help in their search. Ines pulled out an old memory box filled with notes and photos from her time as a social worker. Among the papers, they found a photo of Marta, smiling at the camera, with an expression of hope and vulnerability that made Thomas feel an immediate connection. "This is Marta," Ines said softly, handing the photo to Thomas. "She was an incredible woman, and I'm sure she would want to meet you." Thomas held the photo carefully, feeling a mix of emotion and determination. He knew that finding Marta wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face any obstacle in his path. With the help of Ines and Mr. Perez, he was determined to uncover the secrets of the past and finally reunite with the woman who gave him life. The dawn brought with it a new determination for Thomas and Mr. Perez. Both knew they had to act quickly if they wanted to find Marta. They met at a cafe, ready to start their search. "Thomas, I've made some calls," Mr. Perez said, looking at the young man seriously. "I have some contacts who can help us get more information about what might have happened to Marta. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find her." Thomas nodded, feeling the same determination. "Thank you, Mr. Perez. Whatever we can do, I'm ready." They began their investigation by reviewing old police reports and talking to Ines's former colleagues in social work. Every little detail, every clue they could find, brought them a little closer to the truth. It wasn't long before a name began to surface. Repeatedly, Rafael, Marta's boyfriend, Mr. Perez said, frowning. "We always knew he had something to do with her disappearance, but we could never prove it. If he is responsible, we need to find him." Their first leads took them to an old address, an apartment in the city center where Rafael had lived for a while. It was a grim and worn-out place, but even so, Thomas and Mr. Perez began asking questions. They talked to neighbors and people in the area, but no one seemed to remember Rafael or have useful information. Frustration was growing when they finally found someone willing to talk, an elderly woman who lived in the same building. "Rafael," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I remember that man. He always gave me a bad feeling. The last time I saw him, he was with a young woman." She looked scared. Thomas felt a chill. "Do you remember when that was?" he asked, his voice anxious. "Many years ago. I think it was just before she disappeared. The police came several times, but they never found anything." With this information, Thomas and Mr. Perez realized that Rafael must have had more places where he could have taken Marta. They continued investigating, looking for any trace that could lead them to him. Finally, their efforts paid off when they found records of a small warehouse on the outskirts of the city, rented under an alias that Rafael used to use. The warehouse was a grim and desolate place, but Thomas and Mr. Perez were not intimidated. With the help of a locksmith, they managed to get in. Inside, they found boxes full of documents, many of them with fake names and addresses. Among the papers, they found something that chilled their blood: a series of letters and photographs documenting Marta's kidnapping. The letters were from Rafael to an unknown associate, detailing their plans and the need to keep Marta hidden. The photographs showed Marta in various places, always with an expression of fear and despair. "This is monstrous," Mr. Perez murmured, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "We have to take this to the police." Thomas nodded, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Yes, but first we need more evidence. If we're going to expose Raphael, we need to make sure he can't escape this time. They decided to keep investigating, hoping to find conclusive evidence they could use to end Marta's nightmare. Every day brought new challenges and dangers, but also brought them closer to the truth. Finally, they found a name in the documents that could be Raphael's associate, someone with access to resources and connections. With this new lead, Thomas and Mr. Perez knew they were on the right track. They didn't rest until they found more information, determined to uncover the whole network of lies and corruption that kept Marta hidden. The search for the truth had united them, and now, more than ever, they were determined to rescue Marta and bring justice to their lives. The path was still long, but they knew they were not alone. With every step, they got closer to unraveling the mystery and finding the peace they longed for. The investigation led Thomas and Mr. Perez to discover a name that appeared repeatedly in the documents, a doctor named Dr. Emilio Ferrer. The letters and records seemed to indicate that this man played a crucial role in keeping Marta hidden. With this new clue, Thomas and Mr. Perez decided to follow Dr. Ferrer's trail, hoping he could provide the answers they needed. After a series of calls and searches, they discovered that Dr. Ferrer had worked at a now abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the city. The place had been closed for years, and rumors spoke of unethical practices and mysterious disappearances. On a rainy morning, Thomas and Mr. Perez headed to the hospital. The structure, a desolate shadow of its former glory, stood against the gray sky. Broken windows and graffiti-covered walls testified to years of abandonment. But amid that desolation, both men felt a renewed hope. They knew that, somehow, this place held the keys to finding Marta. "This place gives me the creeps," Thomas commented as they walked through the main entrance, their steps echoing in the empty hallway. Mr. Perez nodded, holding a flashlight that illuminated their path. "We have to be careful," Mr. Perez said. "We don't know what or who we might find here." They began exploring the rooms, checking every corner for any clue that could guide them. The hospital was full of old files and obsolete medical equipment, all covered in a layer of dust and mold. Finally, in an office in the basement, they found what they were looking for. In a rusty filing cabinet, among old medical records, they found a set of documents detailing experiments and treatments that Dr. Ferrer had performed on unregistered patients. Among these documents was a file with the name Marta Perez. Thomas felt a mix of horror and hope as he read the file. Marta had been admitted under a false name and had been under Dr. Ferrer's care for several years. The records indicated that she had been moved several times, but always under Ferrer's supervision and his associates. "This is enough to go to the police," Mr. Perez said with a trembling voice. "With these documents, we can prove Marta was here and that Ferrer is part of all this." Thomas nodded, but something in the documents caught his attention. A handwritten address in the corner of a page, a location he didn't recognize. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the address. "It could be where they took her after here." Mr. Perez noted the address, and both agreed to follow that lead before involving the authorities. They knew that every minute counted, and that any delay could mean more danger for Marta. The next day, Thomas and Mr. Perez arrived at the address, a small apartment complex in a poor neighborhood. They decided to investigate cautiously, asking neighbors if they had seen anyone matching Marta's description. A neighbor, an older woman with a worried expression, finally gave them a clue. "I remember a young woman who looked like the photo you showed me. She lived here a few years ago, but left suddenly. I heard rumors that they took her to some place on the outskirts, a kind of private clinic." With this new information, Thomas and Mr. Perez felt they were getting closer. They decided to follow the trail to that clinic, hoping it was the last link in the chain that would lead them to Marta. The journey was long and filled with uncertainty, but every step brought them closer to the truth. They arrived at the clinic at sunset, a discreet building surrounded by high walls. They knew this was one of their last chances to find Marta, and they were determined not to give up. With hearts pounding, they approached the entrance, prepared to face any obstacle in their way. They knew Marta's rescue was near and that every sacrifice and risk would be worth it in the end. The private clinic loomed before them, a discreet and silent building that seemed to hide more than it showed. Thomas and Mr. Perez knew they had to proceed with caution, not only because they were looking for Marta, but because Raphael and his accomplices represented a real and present danger. "Let's go in," Mr. Perez said, his voice firm but low. "But we have to be careful. We don't know who or what we might find inside." Thomas nodded, feeling adrenaline coursing through his veins. Carefully, they approached a side door and, after making sure no one was in sight, forced it open. Inside, the clinic was a maze of hallways and rooms, all lit by the dim glow of fluorescent bulbs. They moved cautiously, checking each room for any sign of Marta. However, every door they opened revealed only obsolete medical equipment and empty rooms. Frustration began to grow when they heard voices approaching. Thomas and Mr. Perez quickly hid behind a curtain in one of the rooms, holding their breath as the voices passed nearby. "We can't let anyone find out what we're doing here," said a male voice. "Raphael won't tolerate it." The name Raphael made Thomas feel a chill. They knew they were in the right place, but also that the danger was closer than they had imagined. They waited for the voices to fade before leaving their hiding place. They continued exploring and finally found a room that seemed more used than the others. Upon entering, they found a young woman sitting on a bed, chained and with an expression of hopelessness. It was Marta. "Marta," Mr. Perez whispered, tears in his eyes. Marta looked up, and her eyes met Thomas's. Although she was weak and disoriented, a spark of recognition shone in her eyes. "Dad," Marta murmured, as tears began to stream down her cheeks. Thomas and Mr. Perez ran to her, breaking the chains that held her captive. "We're here to take you home," Thomas said, feeling a mix of relief and fury at what Marta had suffered. However, their moment of reunion was interrupted by the sound of rapid footsteps and approaching voices. They knew they didn't have much time. Thomas helped Marta to her feet while Mr. Perez looked for an alternative exit. "Over here," Mr. Perez said, pointing to a back door. They ran down the hallway with Marta leaning on Thomas to stay upright. Just as they were about to leave, the door burst open and several men appeared, led by Raphael. "Stop!" Raphael shouted, his voice full of anger. "You're not going anywhere." Thomas felt an icy fear, but also a fierce determination. "We won't let you take Marta." "Again," he said, his voice firm. Mr. Perez positioned himself in front of Thomas and Marta, protecting them with his body. Raphael advanced, but at that moment, police sirens were heard approaching. Raphael's men began to scatter, frightened. Raphael, furious, tried to drag Marta back, but Thomas confronted him, fighting with all his strength to keep him away from her. The police burst into the clinic, weapons in hand, and quickly subdued Raphael and his men. Thomas and Mr. Perez embraced Marta, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude as the officers secured the area. "You're safe now, Marta," Mr. Perez said, tears in his eyes. Marta, still weak, leaned on her father and Thomas, feeling for the first time in a long time that the nightmare was coming to an end. As the police escorted Raphael and his accomplices away, Thomas and Mr. Perez led Marta outside, where an ambulance was waiting to take her to the hospital. They knew the recovery would be a long and difficult process, but for the first time in years, they felt they had a real chance to heal and rebuild their lives. Marta's rescue was not only an act of bravery, but also of love and hope. As the dawn began to light up the sky, Thomas and Mr. Perez knew they had taken the first step toward a new and brighter future. Marta's rescue marked the beginning of a new chapter in the lives of Thomas, Mr. Perez, and Marta herself. While she recovered in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses dedicated to her care, Thomas and Mr. Perez worked tirelessly to build a solid case against Rafael and his accomplices. Days after the rescue, they received an unexpected visit at the hospital. Former colleagues of Ines, those who had worked with her in her time as a social worker, came to offer their support. Among them was Clara, a middle-aged woman with a kind but determined expression. "We heard what happened," Clara said, taking Ines's hand. "We want to help." We knew Marta and always knew her disappearance was not an accident. "If there's anything we can do to bring justice, we will." Ines, with tears in her eyes, thanked them. "Any help will be invaluable. Marta has suffered so much, and it's time for those responsible to pay for what they did." Clara and the others began reviewing the documents and evidence that Thomas and Mr. Perez had gathered. Their experience in social work and knowledge of human trafficking networks proved crucial. Together, they managed to connect more pieces of the puzzle, identifying others involved in the conspiracy that kept Marta captive. Meanwhile, Marta, though weak, began to recover fragments of her memories. Sessions with a psychologist specializing in trauma helped her process the pain and confusion. And little by little, she began to talk more about her time in captivity. "Rafael had many contacts," Marta said one afternoon while Thomas and Mr. Perez visited her. "He wasn't alone. There were powerful people behind all this. But there were also people who didn't want to be there, who were trapped in that network just like me." Thomas squeezed Marta's hand, giving her strength. "We'll find them all, Marta. We'll make everyone responsible pay for what they did to you." One night, while reviewing more documents, Thomas found a letter that had gone unnoticed. It was written by one of Rafael's associates, someone who was clearly starting to doubt his actions. In the letter, he mentioned a contact who might be willing to testify against Rafael in exchange for protection. "This is what we need," Thomas said, showing the letter to Mr. Perez and Clara. "If we can find this person and convince them to testify, we'll have a real chance to dismantle the entire operation." With this new lead, they contacted the authorities, who organized an operation to locate and protect the witness. The police, now fully involved and committed, worked closely with Thomas, Mr. Perez, and Ines's former colleagues. The day of the operation, the tension was palpable. The police managed to find the contact, a man named Luis, who had worked with Rafael but wanted out of that life. With the promise of protection, Luis agreed to testify and provide crucial information about the trafficking network. With Luis safe and willing to cooperate, the authorities were able to obtain arrest warrants for several key individuals. Rafael, already in custody, faced even more serious charges with the new evidence. At the hospital, the news of the arrests brought a sense of relief and justice. Marta, although still struggling with her own demons, found comfort in knowing that those who had hurt her would finally face the consequences of their actions. Marta's recovery was not only physical but also emotional and mental. With the constant support of Thomas, Mr. Perez, and Ines, she began to rebuild her life. Her memories, though painful, became a source of strength and determination for her. The support of Ines's former colleagues and new allies they found along the way was invaluable. Each of them, with their skills and knowledge, helped close this painful chapter and open a new one, filled with hope and possibilities. Finally, when all the responsible were brought to justice, Thomas, Marta, and Mr. Perez could truly begin to heal. They knew that the road to complete recovery would be long, but with each step, they felt they were getting closer to a future filled with peace and love. Together, they faced the challenges of the past and began to build a new life, united by the unbreakable bonds of family and resilience. The night of the final showdown had arrived. With the help of the police and Inez's former colleagues, Thomas and Mr. Perez prepared for the operation that would end Raphael's reign of terror. The tension was palpable as the team gathered in a safe location, reviewing the plans one last time. The target was a mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place where Raphael and his accomplices had kept several victims, including Marta, captive. The mansion was well protected, but with Luis's testimony and the information gathered, the police were ready to act. "This is our chance," said the police chief, addressing the team. "Raphael must not escape. This time, we need to make sure all involved are arrested and the victims rescued." Thomas, with his heart racing, looked at Marta, who insisted on being present for the operation. Although she was still recovering, her determination was unwavering. "I want to see him fall," she said, with a strength that inspired everyone around her. The operation began at dusk. The team moved silently, surrounding the mansion and securing the exits. Thomas, Mr. Perez, and Marta stayed in an observation vehicle, monitoring the situation through a live feed provided by the police. When the moment came, the police stormed the mansion, surprising the guards and quickly taking control. Gunshots echoed through the night as the officers advanced, facing resistance from Raphael's men. Thomas watched with his heart in his throat, waiting to see Raphael captured. Finally, the camera showed Raphael trying to escape through a back exit. The police cornered him, and after a brief struggle, he was handcuffed and taken to a police vehicle. Thomas and Mr. Perez sighed in relief, while Marta clung to Thomas, tears of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "We did it," Thomas said, hugging Marta. "It's finally over." However, the operation didn't end there. The police continued to search the mansion, finding more victims and collecting evidence. Every room, every hideout revealed more horrors that Raphael and his network had inflicted on their victims. When it was all over, the police chief approached the observation vehicle. "Raphael and his men are in custody," he said, with a look of satisfaction. "Thanks to your courage and determination, we've dismantled one of the largest human trafficking networks in the region." Marta, Thomas, Mr. Perez, your fight has been crucial to this success. Marta, still with tears in her eyes, thanked the police chief. "Thank you too. I don't know how we can thank you for everything you've done. Just keep moving forward," the chief replied. "Keep living and recovering. That will be enough." In the following days, the news of the operation and the rescue of the victims spread throughout the city. The community, shocked and grateful, showed great support for the victims and their families. Thomas, Marta, and Mr. Perez were received as heroes, but for them, the true heroism was in the resilience and courage of Marta and the other victims who had survived so much. Marta began receiving intensive therapy to deal with the trauma, and Thomas and Mr. Perez were by her side every step of the way. Although recovery would be a long and arduous process, there was a sense of hope and unity that strengthened them. Inez, who had been a pillar of support throughout the search, also joined them on their path to healing. Her love and dedication to Thomas and Marta were a constant source of comfort and strength. Finally, the day of Raphael's trial arrived. Thomas, Marta, and Mr. Perez testified, along with other victims and witnesses, providing powerful and moving testimony. Raphael was convicted of his crimes, and the sentence brought a sense of justice and closure to all involved. With Raphael behind bars and the network dismantled, Thomas, Marta, and Mr. Perez began to build a new life together. The days of fear and suffering were left behind, replaced by moments of peace, love, and hope. Although the scars of the past would always be there, the family found strength in their unity and the support of those around them. Together, they began a new chapter, one filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a bright and hopeful future. Marta's rescue was just the first step on her long road to recovery. After the showdown at the mansion and Raphael's capture, Marta was taken to a specialized hospital to receive the necessary treatment and support. Thomas and Mr. Perez were with her, offering all the love and support they could. Marta, though physically safe, faced an internal battle. The years of captivity and abuse had left deep scars on her mind and soul. She suffered from partial amnesia, forgetting significant fragments of her previous life. With the help of specialized therapists, she began to face these traumas, gradually rebuilding the memories of her life. Thomas and Mr. Perez never left her side. Ines was also present, offering her warmth and unconditional support. Together, they formed a circle of love and safety around Marta, ensuring she never felt alone in her struggle. "I remember small fragments," Marta said one day during a therapy session. "A laugh, song I used to sing, but the rest is still a void." The therapist looked at her with understanding. "It's normal, Marta. Your mind is trying to protect you from the pain. With time and therapy, those memories may start to return, but we must not rush. The important thing is that you feel safe and supported." As the weeks passed, small flashes of memory began to return. Marta remembered happy moments from her childhood, the warmth of home, and the love of her family. These memories, though fragmented, gave her the strength to move forward. One day, while sitting in the hospital garden with Thomas, Marta began to hum a melody. Thomas, recognizing the song, smiled and joined her. "That's the song Mom used to sing when we were kids," he said, tears in his eyes. "It's one of my favorites." Marta looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I remember now. We used to sing together while Mom made dinner. It's a good memory." These moments of connection and memory became more frequent, filling Marta's days with small victories and progress. Amnesia remained a barrier, but with each passing day, she felt she was reclaiming a bit more of herself. Meanwhile, Raphael's trial progressed, and justice began to take shape. The victims and their families found a measure of peace, knowing that Raphael and his accomplices would face the consequences of their actions. The community, moved by Marta's bravery and that of the other victims, came together to offer their support. One day, Marta received a surprise visit at the hospital. It was Clara, one of Ines's former colleagues. "Marta, I wanted to see you personally to tell you how proud we are of you. Your bravery has inspired many and given hope to so many people." Marta, moved, hugged Clara. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without the support of my family and people like you." Marta's recovery was a long and arduous process, but with each passing day, she grew stronger. The moments of darkness were gradually replaced by moments of light and hope. With the help of her therapist, she began to plan her future, exploring interests and dreams she had left behind. One day, while walking in the park with Thomas and Mr. Perez, Marta looked at the horizon and smiled. "I want to start over. I want to help others who have gone through what I have. Maybe work in an organization that supports victims of trafficking and abuse." Thomas and Mr. Perez looked at her with pride. "We'll do everything we can to support you, Marta. Your strength and determination are incredible." With time, Marta began to get involved in activities supporting victims, using her experience and voice to advocate for change. Although her journey had been difficult, she found a renewed purpose in helping others and rebuilding her life with the love and support of her family. Marta, Thomas, and Mr. Perez formed a new family, united by the challenges they had overcome and the love they shared. Together, they found healing and began anew. Chapter full of hope, love, and possibilities. Each day was an opportunity to build happy memories and look toward the future with optimism. Marta's journey to recovery was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and family support. With each step, they moved closer to a future filled with peace and happiness, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing a new beginning. The road to healing and rebuilding the lives of Marta, Thomas, and Mr. Perez was long, but each step brought them closer to a new beginning full of hope and love. Raphael's and his accomplices' sentencing marked the end of a dark era and the beginning of a new life for all of them. Marta, although still facing challenges, began to find her purpose. She got involved in an organization that helped victims of human trafficking and abuse, using her personal experience to provide support and hope to others. Her bravery and resilience inspired many, making her a figure of strength and empathy in her community. Thomas also found a new purpose. He decided to study law, motivated by his desire to fight against injustice and help the most vulnerable. His studies led him to get involved in human rights cases, and his passion for justice was fueled by his family's experience. Mr. Perez, retired, dedicated his time to supporting Marta and Thomas and also began volunteering at the same organization as Marta. His love for his daughter and grandson strengthened even more, and together they found comfort and joy in the small, everyday moments. Ines, the woman who had been a pillar of support for Thomas, continued to be a source of strength for the whole family. Her unconditional love and wisdom guided Marta and Thomas through their challenges, and her presence was a constant reminder that love can overcome any adversity. One day, while the family gathered in the park where Marta used to hum her favorite song, Thomas, Marta, Mr. Perez, and Ines enjoyed an outdoor picnic. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and cheerful conversations. It was a perfect spring day with flowers blooming and the sun shining softly over them. "This place is special to me," Marta said, looking around. "It's where I started to remember who I was and connect with my past. But it's also where I feel our new life together truly began." Thomas smiled and took Marta's hand. "We've been through so much, but we've done it together, and that's what makes us strong." Mr. Perez, with a look of pride in his eyes, added, "I could never have imagined finding my daughter and grandson under these circumstances, but I wouldn't change anything. We are a family, and that's what matters." Ines, observing her family with tenderness, said, "Love and resilience have brought us here. We've overcome so much, and now it's time to enjoy this new chapter." With time, Marta became a leader in the community, advocating for policies that protected victims of trafficking and abuse. Her efforts not only helped many people but also gave her a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. Thomas, having completed his studies, began working at a law firm specializing in human rights. His passion and dedication made him a respected lawyer, and his work had a significant impact on many people's lives. Mr. Perez continued to support Marta and Thomas, enjoying his time with them and participating in community activities. His wisdom and experience were invaluable, and his unconditional love strengthened his family in difficult times. Ines, although no longer working, continued to be an inspiration and support for everyone. Her love and dedication to Thomas and Marta never wavered, and her presence was a constant reminder of the importance of family love. Together, they formed a new family, a family united not only by blood but by the bonds forged through love, resilience, and shared struggle. Each day was a celebration of life and the love that had kept them together. The past, though always present in their memories, no longer defined their lives. They had found peace and happiness in their new reality, and the future was filled with possibilities and promises. With each step, They moved toward a new beginning, confident that, no matter what the future held, they would always face it together. Life had given them a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it, living each day with gratitude, love, and hope. And so, Marta, Thomas, Mr. Perez, and Ines began a new chapter, one filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a bright and hopeful future. What an exciting journey we've just experienced together. But this is only the beginning. Click on the next video that appears on your screen and keep enjoying amazing content. If you want me to keep bringing you these stories every day, consider supporting me with a coffee through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment. Your support is what makes it possible for me to keep telling these stories. See you in the next video.